Are you ready to turn your investments into retirement income? Listen in as Jeremy Keil and his guests reveal ways you can make smarter retirement, investment, and tax planning decisions to achieve your ideal retirement. You will learn more about your money so you can feel better about your money and make better money decisions. Now, on to the show.
Welcome to Retirement Revealed. I'm your host, Jeremy Keil, and I'm joined by my producer, Eric Johnson. Eric, how are you doing today?
Jeremy, I am doing fantastic. I am so excited for today's topic.
Absolutely. Why not?
Yeah, to me, when you say donor advised fund, I think charity, right? I think donations. I think people doing good to help other people, and that excites me.
I absolutely agree. And we talk about donor advised funds a lot, and that's our topic today is donor advised funds. I was reminded again that we should talk more detail. I don't believe we've had an episode dedicated to donor advised funds. And I was reading Kiplinger's latest retirement report, and they have an article about it, actually by someone I've talked to before, David Rodek, a great journalist, and he's featured me once or twice in one of his articles. And I thought, I'm going to read this because I love donor advised funds, great journalist, and absolutely love the article. And I thought this is a good kickoff point. Let's talk about donor advised funds in depth. A lot of people listening to this are going to be hearing this about a month or so before the end of the year. And so that's usually when people are thinking about giving extra money to charity and also thinking about how do I get some tax deductions. And donor advised funds are a great way to marry those two together.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So this is a big subject. Where do we start today?
Yeah, well, and some of the things that were cited in the article is that Americans gave about $450 billion to charity in 2019, which I just think is amazing. That's just awesome. A great number. Yeah. Love that people are doing that. It also talks about how a lot of the tax deductions might have gone away for that charity in the last couple of years. In 2017, the tax laws changed so that 2018 and beyond, these things called standard deductions increased. They doubled. And that's a good thing for a lot of people. A lot of the clients we talk to, a lot of the people that are listening are people that have a higher income, that have a higher amount of charitable gifts in general. And those people probably were making use of things called itemized deductions. You added up your property taxes and your income taxes and your mortgage interest and all your charitable deductions, and you got a number that you got to deduct from your income. And it was great. It worked out well. But then when they doubled these limits, a lot of the people we talked to were not hitting those new limits. And on the one sense, it's okay. You're still getting that big deduction. But on the other hand, a lot of the giving that people are doing are not helping them out tax-wise. That's where we want to come in and talk about these donor advised funds. So we're going to give a little bit of numbers here. If you're driving, don't write these down, but they'll be on the website. Check out the website with all the resources. It's retirement-revealed.com that you can get all the resources. But we're talking about 2021 here, and the standard deduction now is $12,550. If there's two of you, that gets you to $25,100. Now, a lot of people don't realize this till they get there, is once you hit 65 and beyond, they give you a little bit extra. It's $1,350 per person. So if there's two of you, now you're up to $27,800. So let's just round it up and say you basically needed $28,000 of itemized deductions before you got any break at all, because otherwise you're just in the standard deduction rules. If you add up all your stuff and it gets below $28,000, you just get the standard deduction. So almost in a way, you have to give $15,000, $18,000 or more to actually even get the $1 of tax deductions. And that'd be great if you're doing it. But a lot of people we're running into maybe give $5,000, $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 in charity, and they're getting close to no benefit or maybe absolutely no benefit at all from that charitable gifting. And that's what we're going to talk about today. I want to make sure everyone understood a little bit why this is maybe even an issue. And that's just what the tax laws are right now. But hey, let's talk about donor advised funds and how you can make better use of the standard deductions, the itemized deductions, and a few other things.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree. I think it would be great if people were reaching that limit to where their deductions, or their contributions to charity help their taxes. But that's a big number, man. I mean, that's a lot.
Yeah, and just a lot of people, let's just give some numbers here, and we're rounding things. Let's just pretend you're below 65, And if you had property taxes, state income taxes that add up to about $10,000, then your $15,000 of charitable gifts, that's 10 plus 15 equals 25. That's basically the standard deduction anyways. It's wonderful. Keep on giving your 15 grand a year, or up to 15 grand a year if you're doing that. But it didn't give you $1 of itemized deductions. But what if instead you, a couple years together, what if you gave $30,000 in 1 year? That means for that year, 10 plus 30 is 40,000. The next year you didn't put any charitable gifts out there, so you didn't have those deductions. Well, you got the standard deduction anyways. That's 25,000 roughly. So you get 40,000 itemized 1 year, 25,000 next year. That's 65,000 of deductions over 2 years. That beats 2 years of standard deductions, which would be 50,000, 25,000 times 2. You come out ahead by 15 grand because you took 2 years worth of gifts and got them all in on the 1 year. Now that's 15 grand extra deductions. If your tax rate is 22%, that's about $3,300 of federal income tax savings. That's a big number, and that's why people start exploring things like this and finding ways to be more creative with the rules that are out there. Hey, and who wouldn't want that extra tax savings? When you're looking at that, you start thinking, well, wait a second. If I give 30,000, if I double up 1 year, what happens next year? Well, technically, if you're just trying to swap years, you don't give anything to the charities the next year. And some people say, wait a second, I like my charities. I want to give money to them every year. Or other times people say, well, I'm giving, $5,000 a year to my church. If I give them $10,000 this year, they might expect the $10,000 again the following year, and they'll be very disappointed when they get zero, right?
Yeah.
Although they're probably getting used to more and more people making use of these types of strategies. Or maybe you're involved in your church and your nonprofit, right? I'm on the finance committee for my church, and it sure looks a lot better, and it helps a lot more when giving is set up monthly. The church can project out, and they can do a lot things differently if they know, okay, here's what the monthly is that we can kind of expect coming in. You get a big lump sum. It's almost like, what do you do with that? Do you spend it all right away? And then next thing you know, 18 months later, you wish you had that lump sum again, but you don't. The monthly giving is something that a lot of charities kind of just do better with, because that's almost how we do our own personal budgets, is to look at things monthly. Same thing with the nonprofits. So there's this tax situation that encourages you to lump things together, maybe do a big gift in year one, but then we start thinking of the downsides of, well, what happens in year two when there is no gift given? Or what happens when there's a huge lump sum to the church or the charity in 1 month, and the next 23 months, there's zero. There's some things to walk through here. And the donor advised funds, they just solve a lot of those issues.
Okay, so how so? I mean, how does that work? If you're I'm just going to call it front loading. Is that a
that's
term?
Yeah, I've never used that term, but I'm going to start using it. I like it.
Yeah, I mean, you're front loading the advised fund, and then how do you distribute that so it's not in just one lump sum?
Yeah, and part of it that's a mindset that a lot of people want to think about is, and I can't blame them, when you give money, you get a tax deduction. It's almost like they're completely intertwined. And the donor advised fund allows you to break that apart, to say you can get the tax deduction at one point in time and yet give the money to charity at a different point in time. And if you happen to have those point in times across different years, that's where the tax help comes in, by saying, this is a year I want to have extra tax deductions, but I don't necessarily want to give the money to the charity today. And there might be all kinds of reasons for that. I'm thinking of someone, I think it was about 10 years ago actually, and they were retiring. A lot of times when you hit retirement, that's your biggest tax year of your life. They had some stock from their company, and we were looking at it saying, well, you're a charitable type person. What you could do to get this big lump sum or big deduction this year where you have a big tax problem is to gift a whole lot of stock in this exact year. But that doesn't mean that you have to give the money to charity today. It's just you have to designate it. You have to commit to giving this money to charity. That's what gives you the tax deduction. And this account called a donor advised fund, that's what you do. You gift stock or you write a check into the donor advised fund. You are gifting it to a foundation, and that foundation holds on to the money for you. you got the tax deduction because you committed that money to charity. You gave it to charity. The foundation is a charity. You gave the money to that donor advised fund through the foundation. And later on, you can gift the money from the foundation, from that donor advised fund, over to the specific nonprofits that you're wanting to give it to.
Okay, that sounds fantastic. I did not know that the foundation itself counted as that charity. That makes a lot more sense now.
That's how you get the tax deduction, is that it's not a charity as in they're going out and helping people on a specific day-to-day basis. They're a charity because they're set up under the government rules that qualify them for that. And you are gifting the money to the charity. That's what gives you that tax deduction. And then later on, you can designate and say, hey, that charity money I have sitting there with you at the foundation, I'm designating it now. It's got to go out to these specific charities that I want to have it go out to. And that's how you do it. That's the simplified version of it.
So how many charities can you designate from that fund? I mean, like you mentioned people that give to their church, which I know that you and I do. And so that's part of where my donations go each year. But then there's probably 2 or 3 other charities that my wife and I try to regularly remember in our giving. So how does that work?
Yeah, you just tell the donor advised fund, you tell the foundation that holds on to your donor advised fund for you, I want to send money to these charities, and they send them on out. Now, a lot of different donor advised funds might have some different rules about here's a minimum, or maybe you have a specific foundation you're using that's more focused, the ESG, kind of the socially responsible type of giving. So they might say, well, we only will support socially responsible type of charities. Or you might have a foundation that is focused on a religion, and so they are only supporting charities or allowing support towards charities that conform to those same religious principles. And so you got to do a little research and figure out which foundation you want to be the one sponsoring or kind of holding your donor advised fund. But set that aside. Hey, if you want to give money to one charity or 500, as long as you got the money in there, they're letting you do it because that's the point of it. Okay. And actually, that's one of the benefits of the donor advised fund is the tracking of it for your taxes is a lot easier. You give one big gift, you got to remember to tell your tax person about that one big gift. You give 5 or 10 or 20 gifts throughout the year, you better remember exactly how much you gave, when you gave it, who you gave it to. Sometimes technically you need a receipt for it. That's a lot to keep track of. And the gift for your taxes shows up when you give the money to the donor advised fund. If you give it out to 10 or 20 different charities, and we have clients that do that, they give us a list of 20 plus charities every year. When you give it out to those different charities from the donor advised fund, you don't have to worry about that because the tax deduction is what matters. That's the one gift to the donor advised fund. The individual where the money goes to, that doesn't matter for the taxes. That's something you don't have to keep track of. So that's a big help if you're somebody that gives out, has a lot of different charities that you like to support every year.
Mm-hmm. And I want to go back to something you said because I need a point of clarification. When you're setting up a donor advised fund, are you saying that are there existing donor advised funds, or this is your donor advised fund? Because it sounded to me like you said that you need to pick one that's going to be allowed to give to certain things like the ESG you mentioned. Are the general funds that other people belong to as well, and you just tell them where to give it, or is it something that you have to manage?
Yeah, so it is a specific foundation, and the foundation, I don't know if the best word is sponsor or hold, but just think of one of those two words that works for you. So the foundation is the one that is administering all of it. They're sponsoring or holding your donor advised fund. You actually have to set up the account, set up the donor advised fund account so that you are the advisor for it. You say, well, here's my donor advised fund. I'm gifting money into it. And then here are the charities I want to designate and have this foundation send the money out to later on. And so that's a good point. A lot of people have their money with places like Schwab, Vanguard, Fidelity, and they all have foundations set up so that you can make use of it. Mm-hmm. Their foundations are a little less hands-on, which means they charge a little bit less of a fee. Their fees are typically 0.6% to manage the money that's still in that account, because you put the money in the account and it's not like the money goes out today. And so there's some money in the account that's being managed, and there's a fee for it. 0.6% is typically the fee for the bigger ones that are out there. A lot of the community foundations or more specific type of foundations, their fee is closer to about 1% on average. And those ones are a little bit more hands-on, And they also maybe are more specific to areas that you're looking to support. So some of the ones that we have clients that have been using them is National Christian Foundation, Thrivent Charitable is a foundation. And we've got clients that have made use of Vanguard, Fidelity, and Schwab. And seems like everyone I talk to is happy with all of them. It's just worthwhile looking into it when you say, I want to make use of this tax strategy. I want to make use of this charitable giving strategy. Look at the fees and look at the benefits for having maybe a more hands-on type of foundation or maybe a bigger player that's out there. That's one thing you have to do is choose who that sponsoring foundation is going to be.
Okay, so is there a possibility for growth in those types of accounts where not for yourself, but the growth of the money that's going to go to charity?
Yeah, because you put the money in that account and it's not like it sits in a bank account earning zero. It's a fund, just like your investment accounts are a fund. And you can choose to have it more conservatively invested. Maybe you're intending on having the money go out in the next year or two. Well, you probably want to be fairly conservative. Say, give me the low risk fund that's out there. Or maybe you're trying to build up a long-term situation and you want it to be a little bit more aggressively invested. And you're hoping that that account grows. Maybe you put in $100,000 and you're hoping that over your lifetime it grows a bit, and so that you have more money available to give out to the different charities. So you get to choose how that money's invested while it's sitting in the fund.
All right, I'm going to get real technical. You ready?
Yeah, let's do it.
I'm really going to put the screws to you on this one. So let's say we'll just use the number 100,000, right? Mm-hmm. So somebody puts $100,000 into this. First, when do they get that tax deduction? Is it in that first year because they put it in the fund?
Yes, that's exactly it.
Okay, so if that being said, and it's being distributed over it can be distributed over 2 years, right?
Sure. Yep.
So let's say they distribute it over 2 years, and during those 2 years, we have some growth, and it ends up the amount that's given out of that account is actually $110,000 over those 2 years instead of the $100,000. Do you get tax credit for the extra $10,000?
No tax credit at all. The tax credit is based on when you gave the money. And once it's in there, you don't have to pay the taxes on the growth. You don't get to deduct any losses. You don't get a tax deduction if it happens to be gifting out more than the $100,000 that you put in using those numbers. And it could be 10,000, 100,000, million, whatever the numbers are on there. That is exactly the situation.
Okay, but you said something there that really piqued my interest. You said you don't have to. There's no penalty if there's a loss. So if you were to put it in $100,000, you got your tax deduction for $100,000, and then that next year it tanks because of, I'm not going to name any of those companies as managing it poorly, but just in case, let's say it went down to $80,000 and all of a sudden there's only 80 in there. You're not responsible for paying back the extra $20,000 in tax benefits you got?
Correct. It's like the day that you gave the money, that's the value of it on that day. That's what shows up for your tax return.
Well, that's fair then. Because I was concerned that it was going to be, nope, you don't get to participate in the growth as far as extra tax, but you do have to pay back the other stuff. So I'm glad you don't have to. That's great.
Yeah, and it's just an extra, it's a gifting strategy. If you're charitable and you have a high enough income and a high enough asset level, you might want to be more strategic than just writing out a few checks in December. And some of the ways to be extra strategic is to actually not even bother writing a check. Give what's called appreciated securities, which is a fancy way to say stock that made money. Now, it doesn't have to be stock specifically. It could be something called an exchange traded fund. It could be a mutual fund. Could actually be real estate or a business. It could be all kinds of different things that are out there. But the idea is that you bought something more than a year ago, and now it's worth more. If you were to sell that, it would be called a long-term gain on your taxes. Instead, if you gift that money, gift that property or security, then you don't have to declare that gain on your taxes. So we'll come up with some numbers. Let's say you bought something for $10,000 a year ago. It's been over 12 months. It's worth $12,000 today. If you sold that, that's a $2,000 gain. You'd have to report that $2,000 gain on your taxes. But if you gifted the whole $12,000 that now it's worth, you get the ability to throw that on your itemized deductions for the $12,000 because that's the value of it. But there's a $2,000 gain there that you never have to declare because you gave that money away, gave that security away before you actually sold it. You don't have to actually claim that gain on your taxes. that's where you start getting some even extra value there. So now you're figuring out, I want to lump together my giving. I want to give it to a donor advised fund to do that. And I look around, I see I've got some brokerage accounts or joint accounts, whatever it is, that has some stocks that have gained. Hopefully right now, the market's still up when you're listening to this. And in 2021, fall of 2021, it was basically close to a high point. You probably have some gains inside of these non-IRA type accounts, and you want to gift $5,000 or $10,000 or whatever the dollar amount is. Go find the security, which is a fancy way to say stock or fund or whatever it is, and gift the ones that have the highest appreciation, have the highest growth, because then you won't have to report that growth. It's a great way to kind of get a double help on the tax return. And the government knows this. They know they got some rules on it. There's this kind of added bonus if you gift securities and you don't have to claim that growth. And so what they do is they put in some limits. They say, hey, you're making money, you're giving money to charity, that's great. But if you make $100,000 and you give $100,000 to charity, they have these limits on how much you can get as a tax deduction. When it's cash that you're giving to a donor advised fund, it's 60% of your adjusted gross income. So if you happen to make $100,000 of income for the year, you can give $60,000 to a donor advised fund as a check and deduct that whole $60,000. If you happen to give stocks, these securities, to the donor advised fund, they limit it to 30%. And so you only get to deduct the 30%. If you make $100,000 and you give stocks, the maximum you can deduct for that year is $30,000. But thankfully, if you do more, and hey, that'd be great if you did more, anything that's not used, you can carry it over for the next 5 years. So you don't have to feel like, oh my goodness, over by a little bit, I gave too much money away. That's a good thing. Because then if you happen to reach these limits, then, well, it just carries over to the next year. It'll work out.
Got it. All right. So, and maybe you covered this, and I just missed it. I know you spoke about the fees with the donor advised fund, for those that are managing it. Yeah. What does it cost to set up? Is that something is it vary, or is there pretty standard?
Yeah, I haven't found a foundation that charges like a startup fee at all. Okay. Usually it's more of a long-term situation. People that are charitable are usually charitable for a while, and they figure, hey, we're going to make our money on the ongoing annual fee. So I haven't found one that shows $200 or $1,000 startup fee. I haven't seen anything like that. So it's easy to get into. It's great. You'll see minimums. Maybe it's a $10,000 minimum or something like that, or others have much smaller minimums. So you got to look into what the minimums are with there. But if you're somebody that's charitable, and especially if you're somebody that was doing itemized deductions and isn't quite able to do that anymore, it's well worth looking into. You might have brokerage type accounts where you've seen stocks and funds grow. You can gift those stocks or those funds over to the donor advised fund. Get that full tax deduction. You don't have to claim that gain as long as it's a long-term gain. So you look at all the stuff that has a long-term gain, which is 12 months or more, and you gift that to the donor advised fund. It's easier tracking for your taxes because that one-time gift, maybe you only give once or twice throughout the year. That's what you have to keep track of for your taxes. Giving the money out 20 times to a charity throughout the year, that stuff, there'll be a report, and you can get that report if you need it, but you don't have to really keep track of it the way that you do for itemizing your deductions when you're giving it directly to the charity. So that's a big help. Then there's some things that are out there where, what if you are wealthy enough and you're charitable enough, you start thinking about, I want to have like a foundation, right? I've heard foundations are something rich people do. Well, when you have a foundation, there's a whole lot of rules about the accounting and the administration. You have to do a public tax filing. It's called a Form 990. If you have a foundation, I can find out within a year or two how much money you put in there, who you paying, where's the money going to. There's a public tax filing with that. With the donor advised fund, you don't have to bother with any of that stuff because it's a different set of rules. So if you are someone that's wealthy enough and thinking of a foundation, well, maybe look at a donor advised fund first, because that could be a lot simpler, a lot cheaper, and not have this public tax filing requirement.
Yeah, I mean, a little more privacy. And I think that in today's day and age, people are really valuing that, which I do. So that's good to hear. I like that.
And just like you give your money to churches or charities on a monthly basis, you could tell your donor advice fund, hey, there's a certain dollar amount in here, and send out $500 a month, $1,000 a month, $100 a month, whatever the minimum requirements are. Just send it out on a monthly basis to that church or the charity so that you can get that tax deduction in month one we were talking about earlier. You can make a big gift in month one and the charity doesn't get anything for 23 more months. Well, what if you gave that big gift in month one to your donor advice fund and then tell the donor advice fund, yeah, just every month give the money out to the church, send it out to the church every month or every quarter, whatever it is that you want to do. So that way the church still gets the ongoing help on their budget, and you got the benefit of lumping your deductions into 1 year. You might have got the benefit of gifting some appreciated securities that are long-term, so you didn't have to pay the taxes on that gain. And you only had to keep track of the 1 or 2 gifts you made for that year to the donor advice fund compared to the multiple gifts and the multiple receipts you might have to get from all the different charities.
Gotcha. So it can be put on automatic is what you're saying.
Exactly. Yeah. Which is a nice thing.
Yeah.
And like I said, there's a report too. You can see, well, who did I give money to last year? Sometimes when you're thinking about that and you pull out the checkbook, or you just wait around for the mailers that show up in November and December. Well, you can look at the report for who you gave money to last year. And a lot of times, at least the donor advice fund that I use, I can just click the button and say, oh, I gave $100 to this church or charity last year. Let me click it. And I can give it the same amount or more, change around to the same place for this year as well. So it's a nice thing to keep track of. Wait a second, who did I remember last year? Let me remember them again this year and give money that way. Well, I think we've covered it, Eric. Is any questions that you have about donor advice funds?
No, I mean, it sounds like a fantastic strategy. I think that anybody who's charitable that is on that edge, right? I mean, you kind of spoke about the numbers, who could be on that edge. What a huge advantage this would be. And I'll tell you, I'm hoping to be there, one of these days. So that's I'm really appreciative of the information. I'm assuming that we can link the article that you're talking about in the show notes.
Yep, we will find that, put that in there. We'll put some additional resources on donor advice funds in there. We'll link to all the ones that I mentioned, the 3 big ones that were mentioned in the article, the 2 that are more localized, the National Christian Foundation and Thrivent Charitable, that a lot of our clients have made use of, as well as those big 3 that were mentioned. And I'm going through here. I see on my notes, one additional thing. I want to talk about this real quick. Final thing we'll talk about is in the article, I've got a bit of a disagreement with the article. They said, don't gift your business or part of your business to a donor advice fund because it's just too complicated. Just sell the business and then give the money afterwards. I'm going to disagree with that. And I know specifically that the National Christian Foundation focuses on that. They have an ability to help you out with making things easier. I agree, it's complicated. But if you're somebody that's going to give money away because you're selling your business, work with someone that has an expertise in that. And I know of someone, I'll just make up some round numbers here, but I know of someone that was selling their business and they called me up after they had sold their business. Let's just say it was $5 million. And they said, hey, I want to be a good steward of this money. I want to give away 10% of it. That's $500,000. And so he was giving away, writing checks for up to $500,000. So he just, from here, there, he gave away 1/10 of the money that he made. That's awesome. Yeah. Wonderful. But then I started thinking, oh, I wish you had told me about this ahead of time, because I could have sent him over to a place like the National Christian Foundation. So again, I'm just making up round numbers here, but let's just say that business started at $1 million of what's called a fancy terms of basis. Another way to think of it is your principal. You sell it for $5 million. That's a $4 million gain. And that $4 million gain has to show up on your taxes. If you're giving away 10% of that $5 million, that's $400,000 of gain that you're having to report on money you're going to give away anyways. If the tax rate was 15% on $400,000 is $60,000 of taxes. That's a big dollar amount. So just imagine if, knowing that you're going into, well, we'll sell the business soon, and we want to commit a certain percentage. For them, it was 10%. I want to commit 10% of this money going to charity. What if they had given away 10% of that money, 10% of that business to the donor advice fund ahead of time?
Yeah.
That's the same type of deal as these securities, where you don't have to worry about the gain that's in there. Just imagine how much more you could do with $60,000 of taxes you didn't pay, if you were able to maybe gift even more money because of that. So it's absolutely complicated. Agree with the article on that. But I think that's why you would work with a specialist. And there's foundations out there that specialize in that area. And I know specifically that the National Christian Foundation is able to do that with people.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great information. Thank you so much.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. We keep talking about donor advised funds, and I know we've gone into a bit of detail, but we thought today is a day. We're going to go into big details about donor advised funds. We think if you are somebody that is charitable, that used to be getting your itemized deductions, or maybe something happens like you're looking at, I will sell my business next year, or next year is my biggest tax year ever because I'm selling a big property or I'm retiring, something like that. There could be reasons why you want to look into this thing called a donor advised fund. We'll have lots of resources at retirement-revealed.com to talk through it. Good. All right. Well, thanks, Eric, for coming along. It's been fun, chatting about it with you, and love absolutely that term, front loading. That's exactly it. A lot of people talk about bunching your deductions, but I think front loading is a new term I have to start using from here on out.
All right.
Yeah.
I finally taught you something instead of you teaching me all the stuff.
Hey, you've been teaching me a lot over time, Eric, so I appreciate that. Well, thanks for coming on, Eric, and thank you to all the listeners to Retirement Revealed podcast. We believe if you know more about your money, you will feel better about your money, and you will make better money decisions.
Thank you for listening to the Retirement Revealed podcast. Click on the subscribe button below to be notified when new episodes become available. Visit retirement-revealed.com to learn more. The information covered and posted represents the views and opinions of the guest and does not necessarily represent the views or opinions of Keil Financial Partners. Keil Financial Partners does not provide legal, accounting, or tax advice. Consult your attorney or tax professional. Representatives have general knowledge of the Social Security tenets. For complete details on your situation, contact the Social Security Administration. Keil Financial Partners is a part of the Thrivent Advisor Network, a registered investment advisor. The content has been made available for informational and educational purposes only. The content is not intended to be a substitute for professional investing advice. Always seek the advice of your financial advisor or other qualified financial service provider with any questions you may have regarding your investment planning.